Amen. I want to speak to you from the subject today, an unlikely choice. An unlikely choice. Choice is something that God has woven into the constitutions of each of his children. Every day we are faced with a multitude of choices to make. Go here or there, eat this or that, wear this or that. There are factors and elements that surround our choices and have an impact on the outcomes. It is true that they say choices have consequences. For every action, a reaction; for every cause, an effect. And it is these outcomes that tend to make one choice a more likely choice than another. Now, I can testify all by myself that because of my poor record of choice making, I sometimes wonder why God would choose me. Now, I'm aware that it is more true that I chose God more than he chose me, but I recognize God's reputation to work his will through the weak and the wretched, to favor the flaws and to destine the despicable. God makes choices too, and for some reason, he always seems to make the unlikely choice. Such is the case in our text. Today, in this season of Israel's history, they are going through a revolving door of rebellion. They would serve God faithfully for a time, but then they would fall off the wagon and find themselves oppressed by enemy nations. In chapter 10, Israel finds themselves oppressed and crying out to God for deliverance, asking the question, who is the man who will begin the fight for us against the people of Ammon? It is here in Judges 11 that we are introduced to a character named Jephthah, a mighty warrior, but the son of a prostitute. An unlikely choice that is somehow chosen anyway. And you preachers here, maybe you have felt that you are an unlikely option for God to use, that if God had any common sense, there are some better options available than someone like you. But I believe that we may be able to see some of ourselves in the text today and come to celebrate the fact that God uses the unlikely choice. Can I walk you through the text? Maybe we identify with Jephthah because of our problematic past. The Bible wastes no time talking about the tension of Jephthah's reality. He is a mighty warrior, but the son of a prostitute. His mother is a prostitute and does not want him. His father, Gilead, is married to someone else and does not want his mother. His Gilead and his wife have other sons that don't seem to want Jephthah as a brother. He is a victim of his father's indiscretion, his mother's absenteeism, and his brother's bullying. Yet those words remain. He is a mighty warrior. But through no fault of his own, his giftedness is suffocated by his circumstance. He cannot defeat the truth of his past. He is a mighty warrior, but he's the son of a prostitute. And the reason the problem is so problematic is because Jephthah didn't even create the problem in the first place. Jephthah didn't get to choose his family. Somebody ought to testify. And Jephthah isn't the only one who has ever had to deal with situations and reputations that he didn't create. And our situation may not be Jephthah's, but many of us in this place this morning have problematic past and complicated circumstances and suffocating situations that cover up the fact that we have a warrior within us. I didn't ask to be born on this side of town with underfunded schools and violence in my neighborhood and check-cashing places on every corner. I didn't choose not to know my father. He made that decision for me. But for some reason, I'm paying the price for the choices of other folks. And because I can't shake that negative reputation, God could never use me. But I love the text. Can I tell you why? Because the writer saw fit to make sure that it was known that in spite of Jephthah's problematic past, in spite of his current situation, the text still says that Jephthah is a warrior. And someone needs to understand that even though you're having to deal with problems you did not create and circumstances you did not establish, God placed a warrior in you that cannot be denied. God has given you a gift that cannot be written out of your story. And the Bible says your gift will make room for you. So maybe some of us identify with him and believe that we're an unlikely choice for God's work because of problematic past, but some of us may identify with Jephthah because of multiple mistakes. The text tells us that Jephthah's stepbrothers were clear about his place in his family. Hey, Jephthah, don't call our mama your mama. Our mother isn't a prostitute. And as a matter of fact, when our daddy dies, he's not leaving you any inheritance. Now, this may not ring as heavy with us as it did back then, because unfortunately, when people leave this place today, they don't leave anything much worth inheriting. But in ancient Israelite culture, inheritance was a given, and to not have it was almost to be seen like a curse. So Jephthah is in a present circumstance that's contentious and is looking forward to a future that is grim, and he makes the decision to leave town. And we can probably understand that, but it's the decision he makes next that we find issue with. The text says outlaws collected around Jephthah. Other translations say that Jephthah gathered a group of bandits. Jephthah didn't just join a gang. Jephthah started a gang. But before we become judgmental of Jephthah, we have to be honest about the circumstances and situations that drove him to do what he did. Because the truth of the matter is this: everyone who engages in negative behavior is not of negative character. Sometimes things are a little more complicated than they seem on the surface. Sometimes people are simply trying to play the best game of life they can play with the hand that they've been dealt. And from the outside looking in, we only see one part of the story. But we may not know exactly what led someone to making the choices that they made. We got to be careful about judging Jephthah. But the text says he leads a band of outlaws and engages in some reprehensible activities, and yet, when Israel needs a judge, they call on Jephthah. When Israel needs leadership, they call on Jephthah, the outlaw. When Israel needs protection, they call on Jephthah, the criminal. When Israel needs a judge, they call on Jephthah, the mercenary. Can I tell you why this is good news? Because Jephthah isn't the only one who has had multiple mistakes in his life. I, too, have engaged in a lifestyle that was displeasing unto God. And if I'm being honest today, I didn't have half as a good excuse as Jephthah did. I was just being a heathen. I was just out there living in the flesh. But even with my mistakes, God is so fit to somehow choose me. And maybe there's someone in the place today that's dealing with the mistakes of your mother and your father, and maybe you feel disqualified for God's service because of the bad decision you've made, and you think God can't use me. You don't know what I've done. You don't know where I've been. You don't know how many mistakes that I've made. Can I tell you, God knows, and he chooses you anyway. There is no fault God's favor cannot overcome. There is no mistake that his mercy cannot cover. He will not always accuse, nor will he harbor his anger forever. He does not treat us as our sins deserve or repay us according to our iniquities. In spite of your mistakes, God can still choose you for his will. So maybe there are some of us in here who feel like we're an unlikely choice because of problematic past, and some because of multiple mistakes. But lastly, some of us feel like the unlikely choice because of the absence of affirmation. Frederick Douglass says this: it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. If we're going to understand Jephthah, I believe we're going to have to wrestle and recognize his brokenness. Son of a prostitute. His father never loved him. His mother was nowhere around. It seems his father's wife didn't really embrace him, and his brothers ran him off. The only time he felt value and the only time he felt affirmation was when he was engaging in criminal activity and breaking the law. And the text says that when he is approached to lead Israel as their commander and judge against the Ammonites, he says, "Are you not the very same ones who rejected me? Why do you come to me now?" And this is interesting because it seems so many years have passed that the stepbrothers must have become the elders. You never saw value in me. Daddy never saw value in me. Your mother didn't want me around. Why are you calling me now? Well, church, the answer is simple. Israel is in trouble. See, when everything was well with them, when the brothers were in positions of power, when their family structure was intact, they looked down on Jephthah. But now that they are oppressed, now that the tables have turned, suddenly they recognize Jephthah's value. And I wish I had some Bible readers in the place today, because I seem to remember it saying something about how God has a way of making your enemies your footstools. I wish I had some Bible readers, because I seem to remember how God can provide a table for you in the presence of your enemies. I seem to think and remember there's something in the Bible about how no weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises up in judgment shall be condemned. And as God would have it, the very ones that had nothing good to say about him, they saw no value in him. They deemed him unworthy of an inheritance. they are the very same ones now offering him a position over them. So maybe it seems this morning that God cannot use you. You may not feel up to the task. You may not feel like you have what it takes. Can I tell you, God has a track record of taking the broken and using them to be a blessing. Can I call the roll? Moses was a murderer, an unlikely choice, but God still chose him. David was a rapist, an unlikely choice, but God still chose him. Solomon was a womanizer, an unlikely choice, but God still chose him. Abram was a liar and his wife was barren, but God still chose him. If y'all don't like them, there's another man. He wasn't the son of a prostitute, but he was the son of a virgin. He didn't flee to the land of Tob, but he did have to flee from Herod. His brothers didn't run him off, but his own received him not. He didn't lead a group of outlaws, but he ate with sinners, and he ministered to the marginalized. He was an unlikely choice for deliverance, but God chose him anyway. God has a way of taking the flawed and favoring them to do his will. Celebrate the fact that even though we are the unlikely choice, we are still God's choice. God bless you.